Hello everyone. Magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang gabi. Buenos dias, buenos tardes. Welcome to First World Manila with a new tagline, at least one I'm trying out now. The tagline is remarketing our national culture to ourselves so we're inspired to fix this country. It sounds a bit more concise than my previous tagline for this podcast, which was making long-term economic and urban planning interesting to a wider audience and also building a stronger sense of national identity. That's a bit of a mouthful, and I think this tagline is a bit more concise, and I think it still conveys the same sort of mission I'm trying to get across with this podcast. So, yeah, welcome. All right. Maligayang pagdating. Buenos dias. Excuse me. Bienvenidos. uh, Last week I was sick, so I apologize for not putting out a podcast episode. And I also had to prepare for the launch of some First World Manila branded merchandise, which I launched in Manila House last Friday at 7 p.m. So these are mugs and greeting cards with my illustrations, my First World Manila themed illustrations on them. And yeah, they are currently on sale there at Manila House in the retail section till December 31st. So Manila House, for those of you who don't know, is located in BGC. It's on the 8th floor of the Net Park building, but you can always Google map it. I mean, we do live in the 21st century. Okay. Um, yeah, so I've been busy with that, and I'm sorry, I apologize again for not putting on a podcast, but I will do my best to be more regular going forward. Um, Before we start the episode proper, I just want to kind of advertise myself, pimp myself out, and show you some of the artwork I have that's on sale. So, excuse me, the artwork on the postcards that are on sale at Manila House. So here's one. You can see, for those of you who aren't watching on YouTube who are listening audio only, this is a postcard of a Filipina dancer wearing a Maria Clara. Here's a picture of 21st century Leonor Rivera. So I showed you guys a draft of this maybe a few months back, and here's a completed version. Here is a painting of Indang, a first world version of Indang, Cavite. So I'm working on my last video for First World Manila on Indang, and um, I'm thinking about just launching it in January since everyone's in vacation mode already. So we'll see about that. Okay, and here's another one, Samurai and Illustrado. So I think many of you have seen this illustration before, but here it is again. Yeah. Okay. Uh, so also one other thing, here's the flyer to the sale. I'm selling gift cards and mugs, like I said, but I also have an art catalog there. So for those of you interested in purchasing fine art, First World Manila fine art, you can book an appointment with the sales desk, and I will give you a private appointment, or they will schedule a private appointment with me so I can show you some of my fine art, basically a fine art viewing. So yeah, the art catalog will be there for your perusal. Um, I will be there to show you around if you choose to see the fine art. But also, I was actually in the retail, excuse me, the merchandise sale, the launch on Friday. I was actually there in Manila House from 7 p.m. onwards just to receive people. And I will be there again this coming Friday, this coming Friday, December 7 at 7 p.m. onwards. So if you want to meet me in person, we can, chat about Manila, the Philippines, whatever. I love meeting my fans, so please do, if you can, drop by this coming Friday, December 7 at Manila House, the retail section, and I will be there. If not, this merchandise sale lasts until December 31st, so get the mother hot. Okay. Okay, onto the episode proper. This is obviously going to be a very personal one for me. As some of you know from my previous episodes, my mother passed away recently, and I wanted to dedicate a podcast to her. Um, this is well, actually, you know what? Here she is right now. Here's my mom. Say hi to everyone, mom. Hi. So for those of you who are not watching on YouTube, I'm pulling out a little pendant. Uh, my mom's some of my mom's ashes are in this pendant, so she's with me all the time. So it's great that that we have these kinds of services here in Manila. So yeah, it's beautiful design too. I really like it. I'm gonna put it closer to the camera. Isn't it awesome? It's a lovely design. I love it. But yeah, my mom's here and she'll always be with me. Um, but yeah, um, I wanted to talk about my mom for this podcast. It seems like something that's very personal, but my mother and her family did have a huge influence on the way I see the world and what my goals are in life. I mean, obviously your parents always do, right? My dad and his family as well, but like, it's a bit special with my mom because of her family. For those of you who don't know, if you hadn't guessed from my name, I am the descendant of Teodoro Manguiat Calao, TM Calao. If you're aware of the street in Manila, the one near UN, I think it crosses United Nations Avenue, but it's a major street in Manila, and maybe you just know the name, but basically he's a nationalist and really worked to preserve our culture and was a scholar and a statesman in a lot of things. And his wife, Pura Villanueva Cala, was also equally um, well regarded. She was a suffragette. She helped get the vote for Philippine women here. She was also a writer, an entrepreneur, and an investor. So very very highly regarded family back in the day. And sort of that whole thing about Calaos serving the country uh, is always kind of stuck by with the generations. Even with my mom and her mother, even though her mother, my Lola, or my grandmother, my abuela, was not a direct Calao. She married a Calao and she became a senator. So if you're familiar with Senator Calao, that's my grandmother. But a lot of, and the reason is this is important is because the reason why I'm doing this podcast is because, to be completely honest, I do feel a sense of duty to this country. It's definitely, I guess, maybe a family trait. I don't know if it's, you know, cultural or hereditary, but maybe it's in my genes. I don't know. But I always felt a strong duty to this country, even when I was abroad, and even though I could live easily abroad and just kind of forget all the problems here. So it's very personal to me, to do this podcast also and have a first and do this First World Manila brand, and it's also very personal and important to me that I talk about my mother in this particular episode. Um, so yeah, I didn't realize how big of an impact she had on me until she was gone, even on this podcast for the reasons I just stated. But you know what they say, you don't, it's a weird feeling. I don't know how many of you have lost your loved ones or people who are a big part of your lives, but it's only when they're gone when you can really see sort of where their actions or their impact on your lives, where their actions have taken you or helped take you or influenced where you would go. So there is definitely the cultural aspect and the social aspect in which my mom has influenced me to do First with Manila and my international brand, Art and Finance, but also the financial aspect because I left my job in Singapore to do this among several other things, and she basically financed me. I stayed in her house and she supported me all the way. There was even one time where I was staying up late at night doing a podcast for this an episode for this podcast a few months ago, and she was wondering why the lights were still on. She kind of walked in, and I had to redo that episode. I'm not sure which one it was, but she was always looking after me, and it's just so sad because her death was so all of a sudden. For those of you who don't know, she passed away suddenly because she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, even though she's not a smoker. And before I continue this reminds me, I want to just sidetrack a little bit. Uh, we were so shocked when we found out she had lung cancer, and at one point, one of the doctors was telling us that there might basically be an influence on pollution and the increase in lung cancer in Manila, for example, um, along with the increase in pollution. So it's something to think about. And obviously, this falls under the whole, urban planning, maybe social, environmental aspect of First World Manila. But that's something we have to think about. Like the pollution here is pretty bad, and that might have an influence on people. I mean, there are a lot of things that can. I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into lung cancer, but pollution might be one of them. So really think about that, especially, and this doctor was telling me, especially in Manila proper, the pollution levels are really bad there. So really think about that. Also, we didn't spare any expense in taking care of my mother. We did everything we could. To make a long story short, we spent a lot of money, getting her the best quality healthcare possible in this country, and it cost a fortune. So I can imagine for people who are less fortunate than me, like who maybe are from a bit more humble backgrounds, what happens if when something like this happens? Can they afford it? And then that sort of begs the question: why should healthcare not be affordable? I don't. I've never seen, just in general, I've never seen a good argument to not make healthcare affordable to the public. I mean, I'm obviously a business person and I'm generally pro business, but something like that, like healthcare and education, I mean, I don't see an argument. I don't see a good argument for those to be privatized. I think quality healthcare and education should be available to everybody. That's just me. Anyways, okay, maybe that's another topic for another day, but we'll get back to that some other time. I'm going to go back now to talking about my mother. Okay, so yeah, so her family, she always drilled it. My brother and I, she always drilled it into our heads when we were growing up. Like never forget, like your Ilustrado, like here, this is the Cala family, blah blah blah. She was very proud. She's very proud of her family, and I mean, as a kid, I mean, well, she would chastise us sometimes, like, if we were being rude or stuff like that. That's not. She's always saying, "This is how you act. This is the proper way to act. These are manners, etc., etc." Um, so, I mean, that kind of went over my head when I was a kid. But when you're an adult, it's funny how those kinds of things really do shape you, and even your decisions, and you're more conscious of it when you're an adult. At the same time, she was saying things like that, which maybe some of you think is a bit elitist, which we'll get to in a second. She was also saying things like, "Don't lose touch with the common people here, the poor people in this country. Don't lose touch with them." Um, I guess because she's from a political family as well, and we live in a democracy here. It's only natural for to have that sort of emphasis also on reaching out to the common people. Um, and again, I want to talk about, here we go. We're going to talk about class again, which I'll do in a second. But um, finishing up with about my mother, she helped her mother, uh, my grandmother, my Lola, my abuela, campaign, and they were against Marcos. It's weird because my dad's family was pro Marcos, but my mom's family was anti Marcos. It's a weird combination, but she helped then. In her later years, she was also still active even in more civic duties, or more cultural duties. For example, she was chairperson of the Philippine Ballet Theater, and I'm showing you a picture now. For those of you who are listening on audio, I'm showing a picture of this picture that basically the Philippine Ballet Theater had an event, had a had a production of the Nutcracker 2 weeks ago at the Philippine Cultural Center, and it was dedicated to my mother. So they had her picture here. I'm showing you. There's me and my dad, my late mother. There's the chair. I guess the current chairwoman talking, and my mother's image is broadcasted on the curtain before this was before the productions, the musicals, or excuse me, the ballet started. But yeah, and look at this. Thank you, Chingbi. So Maria Avocado. Hmm. Assuming my computer hasn't frozen. Okay, here we go. Maria Avocado. Thank you, Chingbi. PBD chairman, 2011 to 2013. So she was still active, and people remembered her for those things. She loved the ballet, and she always wanted to, in a poor country like ours, it's still good to preserve our culture. And me, if you listen to any of our podcasts, culture is the bedrock on which sort of inspires us or supports us to go above and beyond our own selves and for the good of society. So culture is important. So yeah, a few more things about memories about my mother as it pertains to First World Manila. There's a very, I would say, mischievous side to her as well. She liked to tease me and my brother because we grew up in the U.S. We were born in the U.S., but we grew up in both countries, the U.S. and the Philippines, and we're dual citizens. But she would uh she would tease me because her grandfather, my great grandfather Teodoro Mangiat Calao, would was probably spinning in his grave because his descendants were so Americanized. Because TM Calao was against the Americans. He had a Spanish language newspaper, and it's the reason why one reason why I'm also very pro Spanish language in this country. Called he was at one point editor of El Renacimiento, which means the Reawakening, and the newspaper published an article that was very critical of the Philippine of excuse me of the American colonial government at the time. It was written in Spanish, so he was thrown in jail for that. So one of the many things he did, but we can talk about him in another episode. But so my mom would always tease me about that, and he's spitting in his grave because his descendants are so Americanized. But hopefully, I'm making it back up by with First of Manila, the brand. Another Kalau basically going into media. Media instead of newspaper, which is a form of media in the 20th century, this is a podcast, which is a form of media in the 21st century, right? Uh, so, um, thinking about my mom also and sort of how my experience with my mom and how it shaped my views and how it sort of pertains to First World Manila, like I couldn't help thinking about class. Particularly because of the two things she used to tell me growing up, which is number one, never forget you're an Ilustrado, and number two, don't lose touch with the common people. So I know she meant well, but that's sort of like kind of symbolic of what the problem is with this country in a way that's sort of not really talked about, I think. I mean, and this is just me because obviously my own outlook has been colored by growing up in the United States also, which is a relatively more egalitarian society, and I use the word relative strongly, but it is compared to the Philippines at least. Um, well, it's funny because it's so divided, like these sort of saying like the common people and then the upper class, and it's crazy because we are man. I mean, there's obviously we share some cultural similarities between classes, but like a lot of our mannerisms are different. Our sense of humor might be different in some ways. We literally speak two different languages, English versus Tagalog, right? And I mean, things like class divisions will always be true in every society, but it's more pronounced, I think, in a country like the Philippines for reasons I've just stated, and also for if you've read if you've listened to my other podcasts, then yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Um, and I think it's important because that's one reason why we couldn't fully unite is because of the wide cultural cultural gap between social class. Like the way I think about it is that culturally, I mean, I'm talking about our society after independence from the U.S. Culturally, we become populist, right? You know, no Spanish, no more, no more Spanish. Make Tagalog the one of our languages, even though not everyone speaks it. Or you know, pander to the poor in politics. So that's one end, the sort of cultural populism. On the other end, there's economic elitism, which we're all familiar with. Basically, the the economy only works to the benefit of a few. So it's kind of weird. I always feel like it should be the opposite to a certain extent. It should be more culturally elitist in that like we want to preserve manners and maybe a higher end of culture, and obviously retaining customs and traditions, but making it more economically quote unquote populist in the sense that everyone has an opportunity to really rise up and better themselves in society. So, and this is why I always talk about culture and economics. And I always use the culture of the Ilustrados. I mean, is because it's unfortunate that that's tied up with social class because our national hero is an Ilustrado and he wasn't even that rich. Jose Rizal was not that rich. And if we want to be like him, then why can't we adapt his culture and his social graces, and his language? See, that makes no sense to me. And I know people, the people. I find that the people who are very vocal about like being anti-Ilustrado and all this stuff. I mean, yeah, they're very vocal, but a lot of people really like Rizal and Old Manila. I mean, they're just quiet about it. And I'm not just saying that out of feeling. Like the numbers prove it. Like I have my Facebook analytics and it shows me. I know what you click on. Yeah, I know what you care about. And people are just afraid to say it, which I'm not afraid to say it, which is the whole point of this podcast. So I always used to talk about things like this with my mom during breakfast, and she said she would always say, uh, I love having breakfast with you because it reminds me of having breakfast with my father, my lolo, my grandfather, my abuelo, who I never met. He passed away shortly after I was born, but he helped too. He helped in the struggle against Marcos. He definitely funded a lot of anti-Marcos events and really supported the movement. So that's, I guess, what I learned from my mother. Um, Learning that there are two worlds you have to balance. There's sort of maybe the higher end world and the common, more inclusive world. And I learned, and from that, learning about these two worlds. I want it to be sort of my project using social media and new technology to help sort of merge these worlds together so that you know the word Illustrator shouldn't be exclusive. It should be inclusive. Anyone who has a sense of service and duty and education and culture and manners should be we should say, wow, you're an Illustrator. Like it should be a compliment. It shouldn't be this elitist thing. uh okay. um and I think my mom saw where I was going with First World Manila earlier this year before she was diagnosed. Well, first she was doubtful. A few years ago, she was kind of. I mean, she supported me, but she's very much worried whether I'd succeed or not. But after the positive reception towards First World Manila and me selling some artwork and merchandise, she was more encouraged and she could see where I was going with it. And what really made her happy was when I was telling her my plans with First World Manila, which I plan to do at some point going forward, by the way, which is to show some of this old furniture, these old customs, these old upper class or Illustrato like things, and make it accessible and available to other people, you know, and to show that this isn't just our culture, as in like us, like kami. It's not just kami. It's tayo, right? And when I told her that, she was so excited. I had never seen her excited about anything I was doing, about anything I'd ever done in my entire life until that point. I guess because it's also something. It's also, excuse me. I guess because it's also something that she would like to share. So it is something I want to work on going forward. Maybe in the future, if I do another video, which are again going to be not often, or maybe in a podcast, or we'll see. But I do want to show some of my families and other families' heirlooms, furniture and things like that. And then with us also repeating the mantra that this isn't kami, it's tayo. That's the most important thing. And that's great about the Tagalog language, by the way. There's kami and tayo. So you can, I want to say like us. When I say us, I mean tayo. Um, so I will continue this for her. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We'll get back to some other stuff that's less personal going forward. Uh, the last, before I go, some Spanish Tagalog vocab. So for mother, it's, I guess in Tagalog it's ina or nanay or inay. In Espanol, obviously, it's madre, mama, madre. Okay, thank you so much, and I will see you next week. Have a good week ahead, everybody. Good night, buenas noches, magandang gabi.